Order, order. Elliot Colburn to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Charlton. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered smart road pricing. I'd like to first of all thank the House of Commons Library, the Transport Select Committee, whose report is tagged onto this debate, members of the Greater London Authority, and many others who helped with the research ahead of this debate. Can I also thank members from all sides of the House who have shown interest in speaking in today's debate, and I look forward to hearing everyone's contributions. Before I bite into some of the meat of this policy, I want to briefly set out some constituency context of this debate in relation to Carshalton and Wallington. The London Borough of Sutton is ranked 29th out of the 33 London boroughs for transport infrastructure. That includes the City of London, and is the only borough in London that doesn't have access to a London Underground, London Overground, Crossrail, or is indeed on the map for Crossrail 2. And according to a report from City Hall, Sutton is the least funded transport borough in the entire city. So, as you could expect, due to this and due to the geographical nature being on the fringes of London, Sutton has some of the highest private car ownership and usage rates in the capital. So put bluntly, Carshalton and Wallington residents on the whole rely quite heavily on cars for their work and personal life. And any policy that impacts on road transportation impacts my constituency and my constituents. Now, as we work towards achieving our net zero ambitions, we must ensure that we strike the right balance for our constituents to create truly sustainable alternatives to high-emission modes of transport. Now, to go into road pricing, or charging as it's sometimes known in a very broad term, this essentially involves making a direct charge for the use of the road or a network of roads. Now, sometimes that charge is based on certain factors, such as the distance travelled, the time at which one is travelling, or the environmental impacts of the journey, so relating to the vehicle itself. Now, of course, road pricing isn't a brand new concept. Much of the modern road network in my constituency, and I feel like I'm going a little bit back to my maiden speech here in doing so, but if the House will indulge me, much of the modern road network in Carshalton and Wallington was built around historic toll roads. The Carshalton to Ewell Turnpike, for example, was built in the 1750s and is still an arterial route going through my constituency today, known better as the A232, Carshalton Road, Croydon Road, or the High Street, which is a historic road which passes through the picturesque Carshalton Ponds and All Saints Church, which has been in situ for over 1,000 years. Now, thankfully, the toll road, like so many others, have been resigned to the dustbin of history, but we are seeing calls for a resurrection of road charging across not just London, but indeed much of the UK. Londoners will know very well, of course, about the congestion charge and the ultra-low emission zones, which I get very regular complaints from constituents about the impact that has on their journeys in and out of the capital. We have also heard very recently about potential plans for a Greater London boundary charge, which would mean that not Londoners specifically, but those living just outside London, would pay between £3.50 and £5.50 to enter the capital. Now, that was very heavily lobbied against and has now been taken off the table as a potential option. However, Londoners are now being asked as part of the consultation, to take part in their views on extending the ultra-low emission zone from the North and South Circular, which has just recently been expanded to the whole of Greater London by the end of next year. But that doesn't stop there. Plans were also announced in a report commissioned by the Mayor of London, which recommended the introduction of smart road pricing in London as early as mid-2020. And this was further reinforced by an exchange that took place between the Mayor of London and Assembly members during a question time session about TfL's finances. So in order for us to have a comprehensive debate on this issue, it's important to distinguish between road pricing in its broadest form and smart road pricing specifically. Smart road pricing uses technology to charge users based on the following factors: the distance driven, vehicle characteristics such as the type, its emissions, the weight, axles, etc., the time, day of the week or even of the year that the car has been driven, and the segment of the road being used. So in very simplistic terms, this could take a number of forms. This could look something like a taxi meter being fitted into private vehicles and a charge being sent directly to City Hall or any other regional authority every time it's used, or more likely in the early stages of this technology, likely to look something like a smartphone app which allows the car to be started when someone wants to use it. And smart road pricing has become an area of interest when we talk about discussions around net zero, even though predominantly the discussions in City Hall have focused around its potential for TfL's finances. The main sources of revenue that fund roads and also fund other government spending are vehicle exercise duty and fuel duty. And these are predicted to decline due to decarbonisation, essentially the replacement of internal combustion with electric vehicles. Now, this revenue represents about 1.5% of UK GDP, and zero-emission transport essentially has the potential to wipe out this funding. And ultimately, I appreciate this presents a dilemma. How do we decarbonise transportation whilst continuing to raise money and invest in roads and other public spending commitments? Therefore, I can see why the Transport Select Committee has already done some work in this area. Now, I won't dive into every area of their report in detail, but I do want to highlight their findings for the benefit of the House. The Select Committee made a number of recommendations. The first is that smart road pricing would have to be a national-led project and not a regional one. It was said they concluded that we must wait for technology to be ready to implement such a project. They stressed that there must be no additional costs to drivers compared to current fuel and vehicle exercise duty. And most importantly, I think for my constituents at least, it must be subject to public consultation. And this is serious, I think, for my constituents because they have had so many examples of schemes being implemented on them where they have said no in a consultation, and yet it's been implemented anyway. If we want to have faith that the public's views will be listened to, this simply mustn't be allowed to happen. But ultimately, this also presents a glaring problem. If we price people out of their vehicles, potentially without any other alternatives available, we won't just be hitting people's pockets in terms of charging them more to use their private vehicles. We could actually be costing them their livelihoods altogether, no longer able to afford to use their private car with no alternative available. So rather than looking into this scheme, I'd like to urge the government and indeed regional authorities to revisit their public transport offer. And I hope that the Minister can tell us how the government is going to address this dilemma and future-proof our road networks in a way that is fair to all road users.
Considered smart road pricing. Sir Olney.